Hey there, my name is Karli Williams, and I will be presenting to you all today the toxicity of Timic. So what actually is Timic? Well, for starters, Timic is an insecticide, an acaricide, and a nematicide commonly used by farmers in the agricultural industry. Timic's active ingredient is known as aldicarb, and it is a carbamate pesticide. The chemical formula for aldicarb is C7H14N2O2S, and a picture of its chemical structure can be seen in the left-hand corner. What is Timic commonly used for? Well, farmers use Timic to control a wide variety of chewing and sucking mite, nematode, and insect pests from negatively affecting their crop yield. A few of these pests include, but are not limited to, thrips, aphids, and weevils. So now that we have a better understanding of what Timic is, we can now ask the question, what crops do farmers typically use Timic on? Well, crops that are commonly associated with Timic include, but are not limited to, citrus crops such as watermelons and oranges, potatoes, and this includes sweet potatoes as well, peanuts, sugar beets, cotton, and soybeans. However, the most common crops that Timic is used with are cotton, soybeans, and peanuts. Exactly how lethal is Timic? Well, the LD50 of any toxic substance represents the dosage at which the substance is lethal for 50% of the tested population. The lower the LD50, the more toxic the substance, and vice versa. With that being said, the LD50 of Timic is 0.9 milligrams per kilogram in rats, making it one of the most potent aldicarb pesticides. So this stuff is lethal. So how does our body go about breaking down Timic? Well, upon entrance into the human body, aldicarb, which is the toxic ingredient in Timic, is first broken down and transformed into aldicarb sulfoxide within the liver. This aldicarb sulfoxide is then later metabolized into aldicarb sulfone. And then from the liver, it enters into the bloodstream. So now that we know what Timic is used for, and how toxic Timic is, we can now ask the question, what body system is affected by Timic, and what does Timic actually do to the body? To begin, we need to know what acetylcholine is. So acetylcholine is an excitatory molecule that allows the muscles in our bodies to contract. A buildup of it will not allow the muscle to relax. With that being said, Timic's active ingredient, which we've already disclosed as aldicarb, works as a choline esterase inhibitor, and it therefore prevents the catabolic breakdown of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine functions as a neurotransmitter within the body and plays a paramount role in the transduction of signals from one neuron to the next within the nervous system, which is how it allows the muscles to contract. When acetylcholine esterase is inhibited by Timic, or the toxic ingredient aldicarb in Timic, a buildup of the acetylcholine occurs within the synapses of the nervous system, which eventually leads to death due to muscle paralysis. So like I said, acetylcholine allows the muscles to contract, but because acetylcholine esterase is inhibited by Timic, it cannot break down the acetylcholine within the synapse, so the muscle cannot relax. What are the symptoms of aldicarb exposure? Or in other words, how can we tell that we have come into contact with Timic? Symptoms include, but are not limited to, weakness within the body, blurred vision, sweating, tremors, nausea, headaches, respiratory failure, and muscle paralysis. And a combination of the respiratory failure mixed in with the muscle paralysis will eventually lead to death. So if we were to be exposed to Timic, how can we stop the negative side effects of Timic? Or in other words, how can we reverse the negative effects of Timic? The antidote for exposure to Timic is known as atropine sulfate. And atropine sulfate works by blocking the effects of acetylcholine. So as we said in a previous slide, acetylcholine works by allowing the muscles to contract. It's an excitatory molecule that allows for the contraction of muscles. So atropine sulfate works by blocking the effects of acetylcholine, therefore allowing the muscles to relax or to stop contracting. So that is how the antidote works within our bodies. How can we as humans be exposed to Timic? While there is a wide array of scenarios in which we could be exposed to Timic as humans, there are three main reasons for exposure. Exposure to Timic can occur through ingesting water that consists of the poison due to contaminated groundwater. So when Timic is applied to the crops due to rain or runoff or anything of that nature, it can get in groundwater, which can then get into our drinking water. This is one way we can be exposed to Timic. Another way exposure can occur is due to ingesting food that is contaminated with the poison. And a great example of this is the mid-1980 watermelon issue. Within the mid-1980s, over 2,000 Californians were poisoned by Timic as a result of eating watermelons that still had the pesticide on the outside of them. And as of 2010, it remains the largest case of pesticide food poisoning. Now, the last way that I have listed that we can be exposed to Timic is also the primary method of exposure. And this is being exposed to Timic when Timic is being spread or applied to crops through inhalation or direct contact with the skin. With that being said, it is important to mention here that aldicarb, the toxic ingredient within Timic, is absorbed extremely fast through the skin, rapidly through the skin. Its skin toxicity is roughly 1,000 times that of other carbamate pesticides. The last point I made can be quite intimidating and daunting, especially for those of us who work in the agricultural field or have family members and friends that work in the agricultural field and have to apply these types of chemicals to the crops. So a good question is, what precautions should be taken when handling Timic? When mixing, loading, or applicating Timic, proper PPE must be worn at all times. This includes, but is not limited to, a long sleeve t-shirt, long pants, chemical resistant waterproof gloves, socks, chemical resistant footwear, goggles, and a chemical resistant apron. And two awesome examples of what a proper PPE attire looks like is found on the right side of the screen in both of the two circles. Those are both awesome examples of the proper PPE that must be worn. This next question that we're going to answer is definitely something that an environmental toxicologist would ask. You guessed it, how does Timic go about affecting the environment? So aldicarb has an enormous potential to move into shallow groundwater. Well, when animals come into contact and they ingest this shallow groundwater, it creates a domino effect within the environment. Timic is an environmental hazard for several different animals, but to name a few, honeybees, fish, aquatic invertebrates, birds, and mammals are all highly affected by Timic. Now that we have a better understanding of how Timic affects the environment and the animals within our environment, we can now talk about why Timic was banned. The EPA deemed Timic an unnecessary danger to both people and wildlife in the United States from 2010 to 2017. In 2017, it did re-enter the agricultural world, but this time, and with a few changes to the way it was applied to crops, it re-entered the agricultural world as a restricted use pesticide, also known as an RUP. As I mentioned in the previous slide, one of the major changes that was made to TIMIC whenever it was released for the second time in 2017 was the way in which TIMIC was applied to crops, which leads us to our next question. How can farmers safely apply TIMIC to crops? TIMIC must be incorporated into the soil immediately. There are varying regulations based upon the characteristics of the soil, how close the soil is to water, and what crop is being grown in the soil. Also, a certified applicator's license is required, so not just anybody has access to TIMIC and can apply TIMIC to crops. A certified license is required. TIMIC can also not be hauled or transported without a hazmat license. So how is TIMIC used in the agricultural industry today? Due to the lethal capabilities of the aldocarb ingredient within TIMIC, there are a plethora of existing rules, regulations, and requirements involved with the use of the pesticide TIMIC. Now, these rules do vary from state to state and also from crop to crop. However, some states do not allow farmers to use this pesticide at all. And in conclusion, it is all of these factors combined that result in TIMIC being considered a restricted use pesticide. Thank you all so much for being willing to listen to my presentation on the toxicity of TIMIC. Listed below are the references that I used to complete this project. Thank you.